after that for another 6. Shari was heartbroken that she would not be able to work at Carowinds that summer. The only consolation was that she'd be joining Dawn at Columbia College in the fall. At about 10 o'clock that morning, Shari called her mom from school and said she would call again when she was leaving so they could meet up at the bank to get traveler's checks for her trip. She called again around 11 o'clock, saying she was not yet ready but would call back soon. Their parents generally insisted she and Robert call in frequently to let them know where they were, but that was one of the rules she didn't object to, because Shari liked to talk. For the yearbook's senior superlatives, Shari had been voted wittiest. She'd also been voted most talented, but you weren't allowed 2 superlatives, so she'd relinquished that one to another girl who was thrilled with the honor. There was still so much to do to get ready. About 11:30 a.m., Shari called home again and said her mom could meet her in half an hour at the South Carolina National Bank branch in the Lexington Town Square shopping center. Shari asked her to bring her a bathing suit and towel for the pool party she was going to at her friend Dana's house a few miles away in Lake Murray after the bank. She could change out of her baggy white shorts and black and white striped pullover top when she got to her house. At the bank, Shari connected with her boyfriend, Richard Lawson, and her good friend Brenda Boozer. She was so happy to be surrounded by 3 people she felt so close to. After getting the traveler's checks, Shari and Brenda headed over to the party with Richard, leaving their cars in the shopping center parking lot. Shari called from Dana's at about 2:30 that afternoon and said she was coming home, throwing a shirt and shorts on over her 2-piece bathing suit before she and Brenda left with Richard. About 15 minutes later, the trio got back to the shopping center where Brenda and Shari could each retrieve their cars. Brenda said goodbye, and Shari and Richard sat in his car for a little while by themselves. Then Shari got into her own little blue Chevy Chevette hatchback and took off for home, with Richard following her until she turned down Highway 1, heading toward Red Bank. The Smiths lived out in the country, in a house they built on 20 acres of land on Platte Springs Road, about 10 miles outside of Lexington. The house was set back from the road on a rise, up from the 750-foot-long driveway, so there was plenty of privacy. The girls weren't thrilled about moving from their previous home on a cul-de-sac in the comfortable Irmo community in Columbia, where their friends were close by and their schools only a mile away. But their dad had been raised in the country, and he thought it would be the best way to raise his own children. At their new home, there was enough land to build a swimming pool and for Dawn and Shari to keep horses, though by the time Dawn left for college, Shari and Robert had become more interested in riding a small motorcycle around the property, and the horses were sold. The 2 kids would ride, sometimes for hours at a time, playfully squabbling about who was getting more time on the bike. Despite her feminine blonde beauty and angelic singing voice, unlike Dawn, whom her younger sister used to tease as a goody-goody, Shari had a lot of tomboy in her. Somewhere around 3:25, Shari pulled into the Smith driveway and stopped the Chevette to check for mail at the pole-mounted wooden mailbox, as she always did when she came home. Since it was only a few steps from the car, she kept the motor running and didn't bother slipping on her black plastic jelly shoes. It was Friday, May 31st, 1985. Bob and Hilda Smith had been lounging around the backyard pool when Shari called to say she was leaving Dana's party. They came in shortly after that so Bob could get ready for the golf game he'd scheduled. Bob, an engineer who had worked for the highway department, now sold electronic scoreboards and signs for a company called Daktronics and often worked at home. He also volunteered to minister in prisons and boys' correctional schools. Dawn and Shari often accompanied him to sing. Hilda was a part-time substitute public school teacher. As she glanced out the window, she saw Shari's blue Chevette parked at the beginning of the driveway. When the car hadn't moved after a few minutes, Hilda concluded Shari must have received a letter from Dawn and stopped to read it. Shari loved hearing from Dawn.